Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Ehr, and on behalf of Blumira and 451 Research, which is a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, I'd like to welcome you and say thanks for attending today's webinar, Navigating Cybersecurity, Trends, Insights, and Strategies for 2024. Moving right along. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Most of these platforms, questions will be handled through the questions panel on your side of your screen. You can ask questions at any time. Just click on the question button and type it in, and we'll be handling Q&A at the end of the interactive portion of today's session. The slides have already been uploaded, and you can find them in the resources section if you want to download those. And then also, this session is being recorded, so there is an on-demand version that will be available shortly after the live webcast concludes. All right, let's just jump right into the two presenters. So I'm going to lead things off. Again, I'm Mark Ehr. I'm a principal research analyst focused on cybersecurity here at S&P Global Market Intelligence 451 Research. I have been in security for about 20 years. I've been with S&P for about 2 years as an analyst. Prior to that, I was with IBM Security for almost 13 years, where I was a QRadar SIM product manager, and I also ran their security sales enablement for about half of their security portfolio. And then prior to that, I was also an industry analyst before, and a number of other roles, including product marketing in the security sphere. And then I've also got a couple decades before that, including about a decade as a software developer. And in my current role, I focus on security operations, which includes analytics, as well as some of the aspects of cloud security. With that, I'll turn it over to Matt, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Mark. I'm Matt Warner. I am the CTO of Blumira and founder of Blumira. My background, similar to Mark, is in security and software engineering. I started my first company about 15 years ago. We were working on encrypted file sharing back in the days of selling boxes. And here we are now in the glorious days of cloud, trying to continue to solve the problems of security, especially as we focus on SMB.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, so let's talk about the agenda real quickly. So we're going to go through kind of our perspectives here at 451 Research on the cybersecurity situation in 2024, with a little bit of a look back into 2023 as well. Much of this comes from surveys and other research that we do, including our Voice of the Enterprise, or VOTE studies, which we run, gosh, I think it's 15 or 20 of those a year. And typically they involve around 5,000 IT decision makers. And we also look, unfortunately, due to our relationship and ownership by S&P, we have access to an incredible database of technology transactions as well. So that gives us just a really rich basis of data that we can draw from. And what I did for this session, since a lot of the folks attending are work for small to medium-sized enterprises, or SMBs, I took that data and I did a bunch of pivots on SMB. So you'll see that sprinkled through the presentation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about real-world scenarios and strategies for small teams. And Matt, it's great having you on board for this, because you've got such an incredible wealth of information from the real world, what you're seeing sort of in the trenches, as it were. Whereas I kind of sit in, on the clothesline, and I have a kind of a looking down view of the whole industry. But when we get somebody like yourself on that's working with real customers, that's a real benefit. So I'm glad.
Of course, yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to close with Q&A at the end. So let's just jump right into key information security trends that we're seeing here at 451 Research. So interestingly, even though 2023 was a down year for M&A, or mergers and acquisitions, for a lot of organizations, that was absolutely not true in cyber. And anybody that's in cyber knows this for a fact. It was a crazy year. And then 2024, as you might expect, is really not showing any signs of slowing. And AI, AI is particularly hot. I know everybody's shocked about that one, right? So a lot going on in artificial intelligence, and we're going to hit that in a little bit. By the way, I'll call your attention to the chart on the right side there, which is from one of our Voice of the Enterprise surveys. And if you want to know the source of any of these, you'll find it down there at the bottom. But in this case, what I did is we created a chart for large enterprises, which we consider as 1 billion plus in revenue, and small to medium, which we think of as 1 million to 1 billion. I know that's a big range, but that's basically the way we typically split those two sizes of organizations. And what you see there are the top 6 disruptive technologies that our respondents plan to adopt in 24 and into 2025. And what you see, again, not surprisingly, is that AI and machine learning for intelligent business applications was number 1. And the 1 billions plus were slightly ahead of the smaller organizations, not too surprising there. Followed by Internet of Things, cloud native enterprise applications, conversational interfaces, which ties back into AI, especially Gen AI, location-based technologies, and biometrics. And then the other thing is, so, obviously AI, turn the industry upside down. It's still hard to believe that we're only about maybe 14 months since OpenAI went public, and just how much has happened since then, right? And I'll let you, I don't know, Matt, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's been an impressively fast move in the market, and I think every security, especially cybersecurity company, is trying to figure out what's the best use case for Gen AI, and especially within their environment. And what we see in our world, especially in the SMB world, not necessarily in the 1 billion plus, it fits really well with that conversational interface is starting to trend up inside of the smaller organizations, where they're really trying to figure out, like, how do you get a multiplier in place and support the smaller teams and these smaller organizations. And AI is great, but even better is having a person to bounce ideas off of, quote unquote, person to bounce ideas off of. And Gen AI does a really good job of supporting that. But I suspect what we'll end up seeing in the industry over the next year is, how do you position that in a way that's actually useful? It's really easy to just jam Gen AI into things. And I think we've all experienced products that just are like, and now there's AI, and you click the button and you're like, this was pointless. Why is this here? So how do we really leverage Gen AI in a way that drives success? I think that'll be the really interesting kind of pivot point for the industry this year.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, it's interesting too, because we look at it from 2 perspectives. One is security for AI, which in other words, how do we secure those AI systems? Because they are so incredibly complex that it's very difficult to tell if someone is inside of the model, doing poisoning or whatever it is that they're trying to do, or they're altering the output, something like that. And then the other plus side, the upside for a lot of security folks is AI for security. And that's what a lot of people tend to think of, right? So how do we leverage Gen AI, and as well as AI and ML, the more traditional flavors of AI, for security purposes? And I'm seeing some really encouraging stuff. I mean, still really early days, but things where like Gen AI and traditional AI are being combined to do analytics and maybe speeding up the investigative process, and then making suggestions down the line for remediations. But again, it's really early, and I don't think there's a lot of folks that actually have any of this into production quite yet.
No, I think it'll take a few more turns in the engineering world to see how far we can get along on this. And it is very much if we look forward 4 or 5 years from now, where is NDR, where are SOCs? Like, what is the necessity across the environment? Do we actually have 500,000 open positions when Gen AI can be used to change how we investigate things? So it'll be very, very interesting over the next few years. And yeah, AI machine learning is never going to go away. But the thing that we see the most, or at least I see the most in SMB, tends to be that when you are looking for high fidelity, good alerting, looking for an anomaly doesn't necessarily get you there. So it's important for us to kind of continue down this path of how do we solve these problems in a way that makes everyone's life easier. And that I think the conversational pivot and that being higher than 1 billion is really interesting, showing that need for support.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and I think, there may be a little too much focus right now on Gen AI, because there are some incredibly effective, classic kind of grassroots AI and ML techniques, which have been used for years, which when combined with Gen AI make it even more powerful. But I think that, a lot of folks have maybe are not thinking about that as much as they were because of all the buzz around Gen AI. But on the flip side, the buzz has generated an incredible amount of investment in AI as a whole, right? And I think it's going to advance the entire field considerably. So.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's gonna be wild.
Yeah, exactly. Fasten your seatbelts. Okay, more trends. So not surprisingly, ransomware continues to plague organizations of all sizes. It's really driving sea changes in how organizations view resilience, cyber insurance, and so on. And one of the things that we saw and have been seeing over the last year was an incredible drop in the amount of organizations that are agreeing to pay ransom. They're either going with, uh, their resilience strategies, back, restoring from backups and so on, or they're trying to break the keys or whatever. And I think part of that is a function of cyber insurance, which is a lot of the insurers have been pushing back on paying ransom or reimbursing for ransom payments. So that's made things quite interesting. And obviously, it's also driving a lot of people to look at how do we prevent this in the first place. That's all of our security hygiene, and more importantly, which you see number 3 on the chart on the right is the security awareness. Right. So humans are always the weakest link and always will be. So we got ransomware, and then on the right there, again, I did a split between large enterprise and SMB, and these are the technologies that organizations are acquiring due to ransomware. And so, not surprisingly, network security is still hot. So is email security, of course, because that's the source for many of the ransomware attacks. Our talked on about security awareness, endpoint security, again, that's tightly tied in there as well, and EPP or those ilk and its close cousin, the EDR, endpoint detection and response, are all up there. Immutable backup and storage is coming up rapidly, which makes sense. That's of course storage, which you can't. It's sort of like the write once, read many type of concept, right? Where if ransomware bricks your organization, immutable storage will still be intact. And then we've got XDR, which I think is interesting because XDR actually includes most of those things up above, network security, EDR, and so on,
Okay.
And patch management and asset inventory. So anyway, I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting in that where we're starting to see. I mean, hot topic of the week is of course ConnectWise Screen Connect. Anyone who's leveraging that is now in a position where that patch management need, that need for EDR, is growing really rapidly, just because we continue to be in this path of cycle of vulnerability of things that were needed for remote work or needed for remote management, but they continue to be leveraged for exploitation and ransomware. So it's very much as to the point of XDR on there. Just generally, as you look across the market, the attackers will always come with a way to get into the environment. We're starting to see more watering hole attacks, which is just back to 20 years ago almost, where we're seeing get around security awareness education by malvertising and just putting up watering holes and getting to the people that you want to get to at one point. And ransomware and the inevitable criminal organizations around it that sell broker access to the ransomware organizations, you have this need where you almost need to be able to cross every single one of those barriers on that list to some extent to know, well, maybe I don't have spectacular email security, but I know I have a strong EDR. So if I get hit, I can move in this direction. So it is very much one of those areas of, we continue to be in a position as a world where we're fighting against the organizations that are going to inevitably continue their attacks because there's good revenue in it for them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's been a bit of a change too in the way that people think about getting attacked and getting breached. It's obviously still important that you do all the preventative things you can, but the reality is that people are going to get in. The bad guys are going to get in one way or another. And so a lot of the focus has shifted more to, okay, let's just assume we're going to get breached. Now, how do we minimize the blast radius, right? And that's reflected in network security with things like zero trust, secure access service edge deployments. To your point, Matt, EDR is huge because, if you can tell that something is going on that's untoward on an endpoint, you can isolate it very quickly, take it off the network so you can minimize the spread. So there's a lot of these underlying technologies that are contributing to that notion, and I think that's a very pragmatic way of looking at security.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Cool. Yeah, and then a couple other points there. Identity and access management, or IAM attacks, are already commonplace, but they're becoming more commonplace, which makes sense because that's the source of, that's how you get in, that's how you escalate privilege, that's how you, get away with doing lateral movement. All those things are kind of tied to being able to get through an IAM system. And so not only is it a key attack target, but it's also a critical control, which makes a whole lot of sense. And so, as you might guess, a lot of organizations are really looking at how do we make that better, and the basics anymore are things like two-factor authentication, even passwordless authentication, and so on. And of course, coming back around to user education is a huge. And then lastly, or actually not lastly, but close to lastly, is managed services, which we anticipate are going to continue growing. Makes a lot of sense, especially in SMB. SMBs have a bigger problem with things like staff challenges, skill shortages, and so on. And so, managed services, which can range from anywhere from just staff augmentation all the way up to fully managed solutions. And so that's continuing to grow quite a lot. And I'm sure you guys see that over at Blumira quite a lot, right?
Yeah, it's I have my own, like, I've run managed services in my career. Blumira is kind of a focus on how can we help organizations support their environments in a way that leverages managed services as well as helps their organizations be more successful just internally. I think the way that I look at this moving into 24 is, the growth of managed services will always be there. Everyone needs help. It's just kind of the inevitable way that we all go about this. But also making sure that organizations accept their own risk and they know, like, what's happening, how is this happening, what's happening in my environment, how can I ensure that my managed services and tools for that matter are being leveraged in a way that actually gets me where I want to get to, especially as we think about the IAM risks that continue to become a bigger thing. I mean, we can go back 10, 15 years, look at UEBA as the big push and be like, well, that didn't really solve it. Are we going to solve it now with the current push to IAM security? Well, the best way to solve it is to continue to move people forward in their kind of security journey and continue to move forward on that. Yeah, 2FA is great, but what about 2FA with number matching? And number matching is great, but what about adding a YubiKey into that as well? And ensuring that you kind of continue that path of securing your environment just in general allows all the going back to the glory of defense in depth. How do you continue to have those layers of defense so you can ensure not only that you're secure, but you can detect at each and every single one of those areas as well. So yeah, I think the managed services will continue to grow. I think they're probably going to get a little more focused on how they can serve each kind of component of that environment, though.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, and then lastly, the software supply chain security, which has kind of sprung out in the last couple of years, and a lot of that has to do with attacks on components on open source, making sure that the open source that you're using is good and hasn't been somehow compromised, as well as, and this is coming up into the AI discussion as well, around model poisoning. A lot of folks that are jumping into Gen AI are starting with base models that are open source. And so how do we make sure that this is a legitimate model, so that it's not poison coming right out of the chute?
Mm-hmm.
So those are really a key focus for a lot of folks. And then also, which I applaud, the shift left and shift right movements, otherwise known as SecDevOps, security development operations, where you're looking at moving security not only to the very beginning and in the design process, but also all the way through to production and integrating that together into a common set of workflows so that everybody's sort of playing from the same sheet music. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's a necessity for sure. I think, anyone who's been in the industry, particularly software development industry for over 15, 20 years can think back to what it was like back then when it was just kind of like open a dream that things would be secure more than anything else. And we've done a lot of work to make that better, but there will only ever be more work around, like, how can we improve our DevOps and our SecDevOps processes and ensure that, we can get in the middle of that and ensure that there are no poisons or threats that are stuck in the middle. Because yeah, the supply chain is a rough one these days.
Yeah, for sure. All right, moving right along. All right, well, let's shift into extended detection and response, or XDR. And it's hot. It's getting hotter And what I found really interesting is particularly in small and medium-sized businesses, and it's rapidly growing. So the chart on the left is specific to SMBs, and we asked those respondents, where they were in their adoption and deployment of XDR. 30% had it already in use. And keep in mind, so this is a 2023 survey, could be up to 6 months, 9 months old now. So I fully expect that this has gone up even since then. And Matt's probably, because you guys are right in the thick of that, I'm sure you're seeing that a lot. And if your product growth is any indication, that's absolutely what's going on. But anyway, so we had 30% in use, another 21% that were in pilot or proof of concept, and yet another 24% that we're planning to deploy in the next 12 months. So literally 75% of all of the SMBs that we surveyed either have it already or are going to have it, by the end of 2024. And so that's very encouraging because, a year ago that absolutely was not the case. And then
I agree.
And then just one other quick point, and I'll let you jump in. And then on the large enterprise side, 46% have deployed XDR. So that was higher than obviously the SMBs, but only 12% of those are planning to deploy. And I think that's a function of large enterprises. A lot of those are holding back on the wholesale XDR deployment because they already own a lot of those discrete components, and they're not going to just throw it out and start over unless they absolutely have to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no. I'm just going to say, one of the biggest and interesting parts of XDR, especially for SMBs, is how SIM overlaps with that. What's the strength of the SIM behind and next to the XDR? And not necessarily because, everyone thinks the glory of SIM is amazing, but really more of a, how do we meet compliance? How do we ensure we're meeting compliance and then at the same time meeting our security needs and ensuring that, any SMBs out there that are looking for XDRs, it's important to sit down with them and talk to them about what's their data backend. How can you get the compliance success that you need out of that? Because we are definitely seeing a continuous adoption of XDR across SMB. It's just one of those areas that I will always caution people around, validate the data backend, validate how you can kind of solve your business and compliance problems and governance problems at the same time as your security problems, just because it can be really easy to focus on security, get 3 months into it and be like, crap, that whole SOC 2 thing I have to deal with. And it's important for the sake of everyone's sanity to ensure that you're getting ahead of that.
Yeah, and actually, you bring up a great point, and that is that XDR technically doesn't include SIM or security analytics, which I think was a huge short sight on those that defined it, which wasn't me. But I think that the point there is that you really need as table stakes to be able to really effectively do XDR, you need an analytics platform to sit alongside that. And I think a lot of folks maybe don't understand that nuance, that it's really not included in XDR.
Yeah, well, some people who sell XDR are very good at selling it, and they're very good at moving across that the SIM doesn't really matter to you, which in some cases it may not, but I can guarantee you, if you want value from all of your data in your environment, the best way to do that is to have both the XDR and the SIM to really drive the governance, compliance, and interesting things that are relevant to your business, as well as the kind of the extended detection and response that really makes up XDR. Because they're both important, don't get me wrong, but it's an important thing for all organizations. Just because, I think a lot of organizations have had to kind of backfill the SIM component within their environment for compliance reasons or whatever. And the moment that you get into that game of, wait, what am I not collecting? It becomes a really kind of big continuous conversation. And starting from base just can make everyone's life easier in the grand scheme of it all.
Yeah, agreed. All right, moving right along here. Okay, so I think we've ascertained that XDR is hot, especially in SMBs. Sorry. This chart then talks and drills down a little bit more into what the expectations of SMBs are for XDR implementations. And not too surprisingly, the number one winner was higher quality of alerts for triage, followed by the ability to scale and improve security operations, increased visibility into those existing systems, which could include SIM and others, automation of what was once specific domain knowledge in breaking down silos, integration of new telemetry sources that were not already being leveraged, and that's kind of key there too. Guidance for security investigations and incident response. And I think part of that is the integration of like a SOAR platform along with some of those other platforms is pretty key. And then seamlessly integrating varied sources of security telemetry. So a lot of that has to do with integration and also bringing things together, into the mythical single pane of glass, or at least a couple panes of glass. And then and that's really kind of all tied into having a good automation, aka SOAR system. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I just had a conversation this week about how we've all been hearing SOAR for 10 years. I don't think I've heard one person fully integrate a SOAR platform into their environment successfully in a way that made them like a happy person. So it's a really interesting, like, this industry is so good at developing new acronyms and new methodologies. And I say this as a company that sells an XDR product. It's very much one of those things, like, you look across that graph on the left, I think if you went back 8 years and you looked at SIM marketing, you would see a very similar list of like, yeah, we want better triaging. We would like more data into there. We would like this to be straightforward. SOAR has done a great job of getting people to think more around how do we do playbooks? How do we get, those standard operating procedures built into our alerting and ensure that there's some level of automation built into our environment as well, and then growing that automation to get better. So, I think you'll only continue to see more of that. What I'm hoping to see in the market is SOAR being abstracted by AI a little more and allowing organizations to be able to make those determinations without needing to sit down and write a bunch of Python or write a bunch of pseudocode to say, like, yes, this is what I want. So I do think we're going to continue to see changes over this year across the XDR and SOAR market and really helping those. But, to your point around the mythical single pane of glass, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where security is so easy. You look at one page and you've solved everything in the world. That'd be great. One day, maybe, who knows, maybe in like 2040. But, before and until we get to that point, just making sure that people can do the work that's there and that they're getting the right alerting. I think that top one on that list, the higher quality of alerts, is really the peak of it all, because you have higher quality alerts, you can scale better, you can get that better visibility. Everything kind of falls underneath just getting better alerting out of your environment, which admittedly SIM was not necessarily great at times.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and you made a good point too around SOAR. I think that one of the most promising applications of Gen AI to security is in improving SOAR. SOAR, for one, to your other point, is that one of the advantages is that they come with typically pre-built playbooks and things like that, and they also have, a lot of them have low code, no code remediations opportunities or whatever, for setting up playbooks. But if you combine that with the Gen AI, where the Gen AI could actually say, look, we've got, and I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, but anyway, based on some of the early demos I've seen from some of the vendors, this is absolutely possible, where it takes, all the various indicators of an incident and then can gen up a playbook sort of dynamically based on what it's seeing, which saves an incredible amount of time. Right. And so I think that's one area where it's going to be really, really applicable. But we'll see. All right, moving right along. So more trends. So which tools are more important or most important to your small and medium business security operations centers? Cloud growth is still huge, particularly in SMB. Which, there are a lot of SMBs that just don't want to be in the data center business, right? So they're moving to cloud very rapidly. And, we tend to call that digital transformation as a kind of an enveloping term, but that's the idea, right? You're taking a lot of maybe some of these legacy systems, which may have been based in a classic data center, classic sort of environment, and, you're doing lift and shift, or you're completely transforming. The SMBs that we surveyed are actively digitizing business processes, and or as it's asked, another 28% are in evaluation. So again, 3/4 of the SMBs. The other things in there, so I already talked on secure access service edge. So again, that's a lot of the way that organizations are deploying zero trust alongside with microsegmentation and so on the network side. Interestingly, intrusion detection and prevention systems are still high on the list. SOAR, which we just talked about, vulnerability assessment and scanning, That sounds like my audio's cutting out. Are you hearing me okay, Matt?
You're back to good now. It cut out for a second. You're good.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, vulnerability management assessment, that's kind of table stakes anymore. Anti-DDoS, EDR, XDR, NDR, all those three components, attack surface management, and so on. So one thing I want to really drill down, though, to that first point around cloud threat detection is the integration of a number of cloud-native security systems under the CNAPP umbrella. We're seeing so many of these sort of bundle these initiatives going on between SASE, XDR, CNAPP, and so on. But CNAPP's pretty cool because it does include and combine at least three of the most important things, which is around identity management, policy management, otherwise known as posture management, as well as workload protection. And that's one of the key areas I cover, by the way. So I'm pretty excited about that. SaaS has continued to increase, as well as the API security underneath SaaS. And in general, API security is becoming a real focus. And I already talked about SASE, as well as its small cousin, SSE, which is Security Service Edge, which is basically just a subset of SASE. And that's very popular in SMBs as well. Anyway, Matt, any comments, thoughts?
Yeah, it's really interesting in that, you know, the need to be able to get visibility into what's happening in your cloud environments, of course, is only going to grow. And CNAPP is doing a great job of that. XDR has a weird overlap with CNAPP in its own kind of unique way as we go around, you know, how do we want to go around detecting? How do we want to go around using kind of user behavior to identify where things are going wrong inside of your cloud environments? But the areas that I find most interesting are kind of how you leverage this cloud threat detection. So to give you a general example, one of the things we often hear are things like, you know, we use email security from one of the large email security vendors, and it's just way too loud. So we can't just ingest threat detections out of it. So how can we get that information boiled down into something that's more useful for us? And that's where your XDRs and your CNAPPs become a lot more useful beyond, I got a bunch of emails from this thing. No, what I really want is a process to actually work the threats that are being detected inside of my cloud environment. Because, you know, at this point, we could probably all pile up a large number of different technologies that are inside of our cloud threat environment, ranging from Cloudflare to Mimecast, Proofpoint, blind email security, to really anything. But really, how do we pull those all together in one simple kind of view? And that's, you know, I think it's going to end up being the harder part of all of this, especially pulling everyone together. And, you know, the SSO tax doesn't help in some of these cases when you're having to pay additional money to get a better view across your entire cloud IAM environment. It's this really kind of interesting dichotomy across the environment where it's like, well, how can we really know what's happening across our environment if we can't get the right information in the right place?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I especially like your point around user behavior management or detection and analysis. Yeah, I think behavioral analytics in general is really key to a lot of these challenges, right? How do we tell? I don't care if it's a user or an entity, right? An entity being something other than a human, is behaving anomalously. And if you can figure that out quickly, that's how you prevent the boom from getting bigger, right? Is you can figure out, all right, there's something wrong with this thing, and let's isolate it, figure out what's going on before it spreads.
Yep, yeah, very much so. And you know, it doesn't help that you look across Microsoft licensing, and to get access to some of those alerts, you have to buy into these E5 licenses. So how do these organizations that are at E1, E3 really be able to get that level of visibility without shelling out money that they probably don't have?
Yeah, that's a big jump. A lot of SMBs in particular just can't afford E5 for the whole organization. That's a big jump.
You could do the thing that Microsoft hates, which is buy one, but no one do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. So this is a good segue into Blumira, and so we're gonna turn it over, and Matt will take the charge from here on, and I'll jump in as necessary. It's all yours.
Great. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I hope everything so far has been very informative. And so I'm going to jump through some of the details around Blumira, what we're seeing in the world right now, especially from an active threat perspective, one being that just started a few days ago, and kind of talk about how we approach this from the standpoint of XDR, really related to everything that we've talked about so far in this call. And really, as Mark was just saying, it's focused around what are the anomalies, what are the behavioral issues that we can really kind of dig into inside of these environments. And the Move It attack that started last year is a really good example of this, where Blumira was able to detect this 3 days ahead of public disclosure, just because what we do is we look for threats that are happening really at the actual host level. So if your server is running Move It, which is a managed file transfer solution, you're exposing IIS to the internet, you're running applications on this machine, you're exposing it all to the world, because that's the whole point. It's supposed to be helping you manage your file transfers. However, that also opens up this potential vulnerability for your environment, which we're now seeing right now with ConnectWise Screen Connect, which I'm going to touch on in a second. And what we've seen is that these types of attacks really cannot differ. And that's where these anomalies really come into an interesting place of, if an attacker wants to get into a machine, there's only so many ways that they can go about it. There's not, and the way that I like to kind of message this, which I'm sure annoys some security people, is that it's not magic. Like, no one can magically enter into your computer. There must be a path to get into that, either through something on the internet or a user has done something has occurred that allowed this to occur. And Move It was a really great example where the vulnerability in the actual application running on IIS allowed for people to write web shells into that IIS server. So anytime that you have a strong detection that can identify web shells being written or activity associated with it, that ability to notify, that ability to detect moves into, well, it doesn't matter what the 0 day is. It matters what the behavior is. It matters what the anomaly is within that environment. So what we know and what we see is that SMBs and now to enterprise can really get this high level of detection capability by, instead of looking for this new 0 day, looking for the behaviors that would result because of a 0 day being leveraged. And in general, it allows organizations to be really successful at getting ahead of those detections. And to the point Mark was making before, that ability for XDR and EDR to improve the, well, I want to isolate this host immediately, and I want to make sure that I can quickly resolve the spread of this attack, becomes really important, especially in the case of Move It, where they weren't necessarily looking to ransom environments. They were looking to take the data out of these Move It environments, and isolating that in a host allows you to halt that potential for exfiltration of data. So really kind of going back to everything we're talking about today, like, what are the classic TTPs? How do you make sure that in that defense in depth, which I know has been around for 20 years, and it still applies, how can you make sure that you're seeing the right things at each level? Because none of us can ever know when there's going to be a 0 day. That's the intention of a 0 day. But what we can know is how those attackers have to get into environments. And this is a great example that, Mark, you noted this essentially around how can people get into the environments. User education is, of course, incredibly important. And in this case, this is an attack that we saw probably about last month, maybe 2 months ago, where you had an IT employee that wanted to use advanced IP scanner. I think a lot of us see IT users using advanced IP scanner across their environments these days, just to be able to see what's happening in their environment. And there was a malvertiser who was very smart and stood up a watering hole with a fake advanced IP website and a fake exe that just happened to have a Trojan inside of it. What a shock. And this person had no idea that, like, they thought they were downloading the real thing. It was a very well-built watering hole attack, and they were able to get this person to download this executable, run the executable, and start being able to actually move forward into this environment. Blumira was able to isolate these hosts because we look for advanced IP scanner, we look for these types of things, and really what we know is you can train people as much as possible, but we also know the attackers are aware of that, and they're aware of how people work, and they look for those different opportunities to get into those environments. So it's really important to have that stack across your environment where you know kind of how your detection's working, what would happen if someone did accidentally download something like this, and to the point that Mark was making before, what's the segmentation in that environment if someone does get onto that host? If it's your IT person, it probably differs than if it's your accounting person. And if it doesn't differ, that might be a whole different conversation at that point of why does your accounting team have the same access as your IT person? So it's very much one of those things that we're not going to see attackers stop doing this. They're only going to do more of it, especially if it gets hard to get through email. If you have a team that uses Excel, it's really easy to just throw a watering hole out there for Excel. They're Googling for that kind of thing. And people can be trained around that. But we all know that, user blame has never worked. User education is very important. But we also have to be ready for the fact that user education can always be beat by the literally unlimited number of attackers out there who are going to test that education on a daily basis. So it's important to validate, where are we from a detection point of view? How are we from a maturity point of view? And what are our limitations, and how can we make sure that those aren't going to impact us in a really negative way? And this is kind of the topic of the week, I'm going to guess. For those of you who haven't heard about this yet, you will soon, I'm sure. Where ConnectWise, Screen Connect, the server version, not the client version, has a new vulnerability, 0-day, which allowed essentially off bypass and being able to add users to people's Screen Connect servers. And this is another great example with MoveIt of things that you look back 5-10 years, it's totally okay. You have a DMZ, you've taken all the bad stuff out of your DMZ, you don't have RDP exposed, but you need the Screen Connect. You need that managed file transfer solution, because how else would you do business? And we are now continuing to see this pattern of attackers knowing that these are exposed, being able to leverage services like Shodan and Census and say, this is what my attack target list is, because I can see the patch level, I can see where these hosts are, and being able to then move fast into how can I exploit this in a way that's really useful for me. We've already seen Lockbit, who got partially taken down by the FBI, but clearly not fully, leverage the ConnectWise Screen Connect vulnerability to deploy ransomware. And it is one of those areas that, when we look at the network segmentation, we look at zero trust, it almost seems like 1 to 2 years from now, there will be no concept of a DMZ, because if you have a DMZ, you are just an exposed organization that just happens to expose at a single point. And, that is such a big change from pre-COVID, we'll say, where, pre-COVID, no one was really thinking a ton about remote work. They were thinking about on-prem, they were thinking about security, they were thinking about segmentation in their environment, they're thinking about their flat networks and how everything is in broadcast. They weren't really thinking about, well, my DMZ only has 3 things. I have to patch them within 3 hours if I happen to get a patch. And if I don't do that, I could get ransomed. And that level of speed and need changes so much, especially in the SMB space. And like we saw in that graph a few slides ago, patch management, it is inherently difficult. Doesn't matter where you are, it's difficult. And making sure that you can update the specific and important things is very important. But what might end up being easier than all of this is just not exposing it in the grand scheme of it all. So I think we're going to continue to see this expansion of, WireGuard and your zero trust solutions that are going to make it so, at the agent host level, you can just pipe these connections and say, all right, no more DMZs, nothing is exposed. And then those of people who are left with the exposed services are just going to be brutalized. So what's going to end up happening at that point. Do you have any comments on that, Mark? I know it's been a hot topic for this week.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking as you were going through your slides, first of all, I gave you the perfect setup around the behavioral stuff, and I didn't even really realize I was doing that. So that was cool. Yeah, and I think you're making really great points around, especially zero trust. When you talk about, having an organization that's gone to a zero trust methodology, now all of a sudden, an unpatched vulnerability that's not reachable is not a huge risk. And that kind of plays into the whole, let's detect our vulnerabilities, but then it's become really important to risk prioritize us based on, what's exposed and what isn't. And that's kind of the holy grail that vendors have been trying to solve for a decade or more. I mean, I managed a product in 2010 that tried to do that. And, and so, but really zero trust is making a lot of those things more of a reality, right? Because you can actually tell, what's reachable and what isn't. Very much anyway, so. Great stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping we continue to see more of that. And I say this as a person that literally founded a SaaS software solution, but I do see the irony in cloud solutions saying, move to the cloud, it'll be totally fine. We're going to expose all this stuff. And while companies are saying, well, I can't expose all this stuff or I'm going to get hacked. So, there is a benefit to having a single point to defend versus all the organizations having themselves to defend. But it does seem like we are quickly moving down this path of low exposure, continue to contain, continue to segment. And, 2010, to your point, I think in 2010, we were still often arguing with people around why flat networks were a bad idea.
Right.
And I think, Zero Trust has solved some of that because you can then segment it at the software level or inside the actual OS. But, I think we still go back to that conversation of, how do you build an environment that's secure? And that is an inherently complex thing. It's never, we can try to make firewalling and networking as easy as possible. It's still a technical art in many ways to kind of build up those networks in a way that's robust for people.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
The way that I like to, did you want to say something, Mark?
I was just going to make one other point, which I kind of meant to make earlier, which is around cloud security. A lot of organizations, the majority of organizations that we surveyed are multi-cloud, which means 2 or more. A lot of them are 3 or more. And so when you're investing in a security solution for the cloud, one of the things that you really should look at is not just going with vendor A's security solution, because if you go with vendor A's security solution, I can guarantee it's not going to work for vendor B's security solution, right? So that's one thing to look at, is a solution that can support multiple clouds. It's becoming even more important every day.
Yeah, it's the way that I like to talk about this with our customers is think about where you're going and what your growth plan is. It's easy to be one cloud in 2023. When you get to 2030, where is that going to change? How do you really want to invest in your technology stack? Because one of the things that I don't know if there's survey data around this. I'd be interested as to how fast SMB changes security solutions compared to enterprise, like jumps between them compared to enterprise. I suspect it's higher in SMB than it is in
Much
enterprise,
higher.
generally speaking. Yeah. Just from churn levels, we expect it to be higher, right, in SMB. Probably closer to like 15 to 20% change by year, I would guess, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, well, and I think the other reason is because those environments tend to be less complex, so it makes it a little bit easier to change, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it makes it easier, but that doesn't mean that you set it up correctly. That doesn't mean you're going to set up the next thing correctly. And this jumping between technologies, like, it doesn't help anyone, and it really helps if you kind of sit down and say, like, all right, where are we now? Where are we going? What's going to help us get there and be the most successful while we're doing that? I mean this in the nicest way possible. All salespeople, don't trust salespeople. Like, dig into it as much as you can to make sure it's going to work for you. I love salespeople, but it is what it is. And I just wanted to note this for everyone out there who is using Connect by Screen Connect. If you are using it, please ensure you have turned on logging for EID 4663 if you're not using Sysmon, if you're not using Blumira Agent. That's inside of the access handlers in your GPO. You'll be able to see these attacks if you do turn that on. Generally inside of the paths that you see here, the IOC artifacts associated with them. It's important. We see Lockbit actively attacking people right now. It is actively going on right now, and it will actively continue until there are no more unpatched servers on the internet. So if you are an organization that's leveling Connect by Screen Connect server version, or you know someone who is, send them the slide, point them at me. We will help them however they can. It is one of those areas that, very similar to MoveIt, is going to continue until the attackers have decided that there's nothing else to bleed on. So it is kind of, sadly, the inevitability of the world these days. One of these opens up, is everyone on the attacker side runs at it until they no longer can. So it doesn't matter if you use Blumira or not. This is what the kind of things you should be looking for when these kind of attacks are coming at you. And if you haven't updated to the latest version yet, which I think was 23.9.8 or higher, do that now. And if you haven't done it, take that thing off the internet in like 3 minutes, because someone's attacking you right now. I can guarantee it. So just wanted to throw that out there for everyone. We deployed our detections yesterday for this, so if anyone is on Blumira, you would see this. And it's just one of those areas that I think we're going to keep seeing this in the industry, just generally kind of continue through. I wanted to include this slide as well because it relates to that last slide. Blumira, we kind of approach this a little differently. We approach this from the standpoint of it's our responsibility to the detection engineering. It's our responsibility to figure out how to detect these things, which is what that last slide was. It's our responsibility to make sure that we can help you be successful and make sure that you're secure. Especially in the SMB world, no one has enough resources to solve all the problems. It's just not possible. So we kind of look at that as our responsibility to make sure that we can get the information out. We can do the detection for you. We can collect the information for you without you having to think about it. And we can bring these teams to bear from SecOps that are available 24/7 to techno support analysts to the SAs to really ensure that, when you look ahead to that 5-10 year plan, there's someone there to help you kind of guide you through, yeah, this is a good idea. That's not a good idea. Yeah, you could do this as well. And to Mark's point, if you're on AWS and you're looking at Google Cloud, or you are you're on no clouds and you just want to get into AWS, like what do you need to look at when you start moving into these cloud and digital transformation efforts? What do you need to do when you move from on-prem AD and you move to 365? Because that alone is this huge change for organizations to have to kind of make that switch from place to place. So we hope, and unrelated to Blumira, I hope that the industry is really starting to make a change into, the companies taking their responsibility. By that I mean cybersecurity companies taking their responsibility to help solve these problems and driving those solutions down to SMB. When you have 4 IT people, 1 security person at the most, and you're just trying to make it work, support helps, and take any and all support you can get, because it's never a bad thing. And of course, you're always going to hear me say this, and I know I just said I like salespeople, so I'm putting on my sales hat. Try Blumira. It's free. Use it for free, by all means. You can try XDR as well, but anyone who's on 365, you have Mimecast, you have Proofpoint, I don't care what you have Blumira for free. We'll give you the detections for free. You'll be able to get that visibility that we've been talking about today around what are users doing, where's the anomalous behavior, and ensuring that kind of you can make your life easy, because that's really the goal here. Us all being able to sleep is really kind of the overall goal here. Because, if you can't sleep, we can't sleep, then no one's doing good work. So it's important for that level of kind of effort. I'll stop my spiel.
Great stuff. Yeah, by the way, I'd like to call out Amanda's book too. I think it's a great book. So definitely check that out. It's down there on the corner there.
Yes, yeah. Amanda Berlin is our lead for all of our incident detection engineering. She has that book. There's a new version coming out here soon, very, very soon. And Amanda is smarter than all of us. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. All right, we've got a few minutes for questions. I'm just going to knock off a couple I've already answered, but I'll just reiterate. And again, if any of you have a question, feel free to enter it now, because we've got about 7 minutes to go yet. So one of them was around how we mention or how we determine what a small to medium-sized business is. And as I mentioned earlier, we consider that usually less than $1 billion in revenue. Some people go by employee count. That's another good way. Usually, I forget what the breakoff point is. I think it's 10,000 or less, something like that. But I tend to think of SMBs as even smaller than that. The core of the SMB would be everything, from a mom and pop shop, which might be a little bit on the small side, but up to maybe 500 million. Because once you get past that, then you start to look more like a large enterprise. But obviously it depends on the business and maturity and all that. Let's see. Yeah, and I touched on this one too. Do we consider SIM to be a part of XDR? XDR, by definition, does not include SIM, but I think it would be very difficult to pull off an XDR without a SIM or an equivalent analytics platform. Let's see, XDR adoption. Can we speak to SIM adoption as well? Yeah, so SIM adoption is, as you might guess, since it's a much more mature technology, SIM adoption is definitely higher in SMBs than XDR, because XDR is only, I think it was coined in 2018. So, it's a much newer concept. And so I don't have the stats handy right in front of me, but, I think they're it's considerably higher.
Yeah, I do want to note there's an interesting dichotomy that's happening right now where we're seeing organizations decide, well, maybe I don't need a SIM. Like maybe I can just do MDR, or maybe I can just do XDR that doesn't happen to have a SIM, or maybe it has a SIM that's near it and doesn't really, like maybe it does some stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see. I think SIM kind of became a bad word over the last few years where people just didn't want to deal with it anymore. But it's still really that data analysis backbone that solves a lot of the compliance and detection problems that are within our environments.
Yeah. The other thing I've seen is the definition of SIM has enlarged over the years. It used to be, when I was a product manager, a SIM product manager, it was kind of a fairly concise definition. You had to have a capability of collecting data, normalizing it, storing it at high rates, of events and whatnot, and then doing, correlations and analytics on that. And that's still obviously a big part of what SIM is, but it's also now been expanded to include things like Elastic, where people are really trying to do it themselves, right? Let's get all the data in one place, and now let's see what we can do with it. And, I think what you're missing there with those solutions is, to your point, Matt, and to your organization, which is the analytics part and the fact that you've got really, really bright people working for you that know security, that are constantly building those detections in, rather than sort of a roll your own or relying on a vendor where SIM isn't their main business, right?
So I think I think we've seen a really interesting growth with open source rules like Sigma rules to support those roll your own SIMs, which can be great. But the area I like to caveat that and warn people of is like be ready to put time into tuning those rules to work for your environment, because they aren't for you, they're for the world. So those can work great. The hard part is of course time. Time is always the hard part.
And skills.
Yep, time and skills.
Yeah. Having detection engineers on staff is difficult, right? As you guys well know.
Yep.
Let's see. Yeah, here was another one. So if you could pick one action that an SMB could take to improve the security posture in the short term, say in the next 6 months, what would you recommend? I'll let you go first, Matt.
I think my answer will always, obviously implementing a SIM, but other than that, I think probably the most impactful way to support an environment is, it hasn't changed a lot, which is implementing MFA and strong MFA these days. Number matching MFA if possible, ensuring that your teams are trained on it, and if even better is implementing your YubiKeys, your biometrics to ensure that there is a human on the end that you expect to be there. We continue to see push exhaustion attacks against non-number matching 2FA, but we know from a large number of breaches and attacks that we've seen over the last 6-7 years that MFA would have stopped a good portion of them. Like it doesn't stop everything, don't get me wrong, but it is a great place to just say, like, are we validating how people authenticate? Because if we aren't, that is a great place to start.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think dovetailing off of that, of course, is user education. So, one thing obviously is let's prevent users from doing dumb things. And the other one is let's prevent people from doing dumb things by teaching them how not to do dumb things. But if you combine technology like very strong MFA along with the education, then you've got a long way to moving toward that. And it's, in some cases it can be a lighter lift than others. One quick question that I just see here. Someone was asking where they could find that data that's in the charts that I had in my part of the deck. Unfortunately, unless you're a 451 subscriber, that's a proprietary data set. So you have to be a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, you'll find all that stuff in our portal, all the way down to Excel charts and everything. So feel free to check into that. And then each one of those charts has the actual survey that it came from.
So you should subscribe to 451. There you go.
Yes, absolutely. Got to put a plug for our stuff too. All right. So with that, we're almost out of time. So thanks, Matt. This has been really fun, as always. This is not our first go around with webinars, so I appreciate having you on again. And here's my contact information. If you have additional questions, feel free to send them to me and or Matt. His email address was at the beginning of the deck. And I want to thank everybody for their time. And here's the obligatory little disclaimer that our lawyers make us put in every one of these. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kim. You're in the background there. Great job today. And everybody have a great day.
Have a great one.